This is the Full Ton Podcast. And welcome back for the very first time to the Full Ton Podcast. I am your permanent guest host, John Fulton, and joining me today is the eternally cheerful Dark Lord of Engineering, Professor Matt. Or Matt, as we like to call him.
Hi, how are you doing?
Most of you tuning in are probably thinking, hey, why isn't this an Army Men video? And the answer to that is please, please, please don't go away. The Army Men are not going anywhere, and neither should you. Stick around and you will learn the answer to life, the universe, and everything.
42.
No, that's not it.
37?
Why are we doing a podcast? Long story. Short version is that to be a good filmmaker, well, you need to learn, and I want to share a little bit of what I've learned.
I don't learn anything.
He does not learn anything. That's because Matthew is an engineer and not a creative like me.
I got it programmed into me when I was small.
Yes, actually, I think that's kind of it's a misnomer that people in engineering fields and fields that aren't, it's like they have a name for people they call creatives, and I feel like they made it up just so that they would have enough of an umbrella term that they could throw all of the artists, filmmakers, novelists, and all of and
as long as you're not doing
advertising
something
people.
Useful. No,
right.
sorry.
As long as you're not doing something useful with your life, you can be called a creative, quote unquote.
No, it's true. I think it's funny when I was going into college. One of the things I recognized is that there's a really great quote by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, which some people should go look up because it's a really cool quote from an artist's perspective of an engineer.
The Russian.
Yeah, I read that quote one time, and I was always a fan of Solzhenitsyn.
What did he say? You had a quote.
I could look it up for you, but
we'll get to it. We'll get to it later.
But he talked about the
really
broad range of things they could discuss.
Oh, okay. I see. Yeah. Engineering is a really broad subject. Anyway, Matthew is brilliant. Matthew is smart. Matthew is dangerous. Moving on. Where was I? Oh, yes. Why are we doing a podcast? You need to learn. I want to share what I've learned. This is a podcast. This is a podcast about art as a language between both creators and their audience. I like creators. See, that's better than creatives, I think. Well, okay.
Engineers are definitely creators.
Yeah, they're also that, and now it's okay. Anyway, and it's also about goofing off and BSing about pop culture.
We don't create very many stories, though.
Which I think you've picked up the goofing off part. All right, anyway, so this is a show about everything about storytelling. That means visual storytelling, that means sound design, art design, even plain old text, like with novels.
Or in layman's terms.
Or in script writing. Oh, yeah, they call it prose. Prose. Okay, so today's topic, our very first, is battle scenes in movies. What makes them good, what makes them awful, what makes them suck, which is different. No, it's not. Anyway, so we're going to go from World War II, kind of segue over to Star Wars, and if we don't get bogged down there for too long, because that's really deserves its own episode.
The One Ring has a pull. It's all its own.
Well, we were talking about Star Wars.
I know, but that's where we're going.
Anyway, if we don't get bogged down there for too long, we'll go on to ancient and medieval and some sci-fi or fantasy stuff. One of the things that sparked my interest in creating the Army Men movies in the first place was this kind of desire to replicate the massive battles I saw in war movies. Action movies are a lot of fun, and they're usually a lot more focused when it comes to character and story, but nothing can outdo watching 1,000 real-life extras sprinting across a beach in a flyover shot. That is crazy stuff. It doesn't get more epic than that.
Yep.
I'm referring to that shot of the Germans flying over Sword Beach.
That was crazy.
In The Longest Day,
yep.
Which is one of the most awesome, at least in cinematographical terms, war movies ever. Like if you thought Dunkirk was amazing, go see The Longest Day. You will have your pants blown off, and your socks and any hair pieces that you happen to be wearing at the time. But I'm not judging. That's all. Anyway, there was a time when it seemed like a third of the Army Men shorts on YouTube were about D-Day, and when you watch them, you usually find that they're trying to replicate the opening landing from Saving Private Ryan, but honestly, when I saw Saving Private Ryan, the first thing I thought was, "Oh, it's The Longest Day, but in color."
There you go. Yeah, it's true. They do have that whole scene, and then Medal of Honor riffs off it.
The color of blood.
Well, and that's one of the
Oh,
interesting
yeah, and
things.
Medal of Honor. Well, see, that's the thing, is that Medal of Honor was the very, very first one was sponsored by Spielberg. Like,
Oh, really?
I don't remember if it was... I don't remember how it exactly worked, but basically, that's part of the reason why those games are so much like that. But if you want to find out who did some of the best landing scenes ever that you see, go back to The Longest Day. And even the ones in the Big Red One, they had those, and I wasn't terribly impressed. But just for sheer scale, The Longest Day, you can't beat The Longest Day.
Well, and it's an interesting thing because that theme of this sort of assault landing gets carried on all the time. It got into video games and it got into popular culture in a lot of different ways. And so you see it in all sorts of movies that have no business using it. Like you look at Star Wars, they use something very similar to that. A lot of the same thematic aspects to it.
They literally had flying Higgins boats.
Flying Higgins boats. And then they also, in Robin Hood, they've got the French have these like crazy landing craft.
That's one of the most absurd examples too.
Yeah, just so
Ridley
anyone...
Scott Robin Hood.
Yeah, just so everyone knows, after the Norman invasion, I think I went and looked this up, and I could not find a single instance of a French landing after the Norman invasion.
Yeah, so not only historically incorrect, but a historically incorrect depiction.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, they thought about it.
Yeah.
They just decided it was stupid because it was stupid.
Right. And it's even funnier because it's like nobody in Hollywood knows how to make a landing any different now.
Well, and not only that, but they apply it to everything.
You're talking about how that was, and you were exactly right. It wasn't just like the French in that scene roll their boats up to the beach and then get out. It's not those kind of boats. They have the drop-down ramp in front, and it's made of wood.
Yep.
I mean, I almost forgave that in The Lord of the Rings. They have that scene in The Lord of the Rings. Remember when they crossed
but it makes a lot more
in
sense.
the two towers and they cross the river into Osgiliath?
That is actually commonly used.
Well, yeah, but it's still the orcs have Higgins boats. There is no other design for landing craft in movies.
I guess what I'm saying is one of the downsides of that sort of landing craft, and the reason why you use those in that situation, the reason why people did do something more like that, because the whole point of that landing is to get as many troops on the beach as fast as you can.
Yes.
Essentially, it's to get so many bodies in one place that the enemy can't really pin them down, and then you get off the beach. That's the whole point there. That's why the D-Day landing is supposed to be this sort of cinematically this exercise in everybody dies and doesn't get anything done. Everybody runs out of the Higgins boat and immediately gets gunned down by an MG-42.
Yeah, well, but that wasn't how it was intended to go, right?
No. What I'm saying is the reason why people
the idea
didn't
that you were
do that
drop
before.
the ramp down and then that a machine gun was going to open right into it, and you just had to squeeze enough meat out the front of the boat for to get the last guys
throw
out.
500 guys down out of that boat, and eventually he'll run out of ammo.
But that was not the plan.
Yeah, that was not the plan. That was it going wrong, and I think that's one of the things that people don't really give credit for that, because that, for example, the thing we think about is Omaha Beach all the time.
Right, and that's the one where everything went the worst.
It was more of a tactical, I wouldn't call it a strategic failure, but it was a tactical failure on many levels. And the reason why people got stuck on the beach and got machine gunned down is because they weren't able to get off the beach, and
the bombardment didn't knock out as many of the fortifications as they were hoping for.
Right. It was a very heavily
on the British beaches,
heavily fortified stretch of beach.
On the British beaches and the Canadian beaches and the other was it Omaha?
Yeah, almost everywhere else they just walked off the beach pretty much. They showed up, unloaded their tanks, and then the Germans were like, "This ain't worth it."
Yeah, I mean it was precarious. I'll give them that, but that wasn't plan A. That's kind of the problem I have with it, because you look at, for example, that orc landing in Osgiliath, right?
Right.
They
cross this very short stretch of water, for one, in very rickety transports. That makes sense. You don't need really great transports if you're crossing a very short spit of land or something like that. But if you're going out, you're going to go cross the English Channel or something like that. Holy smokes, dude! Those guys are going to sink,
Yeah.
Those boats are not seaworthy, really, and they don't really have any sails.
You're referring to how they have to cross the English Channel in the Ridley Scott movie.
Yeah,
that's true, because in the D-Day landings, they don't actually, it's like you didn't have, they had like three sizes of landing craft. They had little Higgins boats, and those carried the infantry, and then that carried like 16 guys,
Right.
or 30 guys or something max.
Yeah, it's 30, probably
and
30
then
guys, yeah.
those actually deployed out of what they called an LST, and that had the doors were vertical in
Right.
the bow, and they still use variants of these. And
It was the precursor to the modern day assault ship. That's what they call it.
Yeah.
A naval assault craft. So the whole point of that is to affect, put as many people on the beach or on the place you're trying to attack as possible to overwhelm the local defenses, right?
Right.
And the thing is that works great if you knock up an enemy, you use some misdirection. So you want that anvil or you want the hammer to land on the anvil at the right time and at the right moment so that your enemy is disorganized. This is what's called the assault, right? This is shock tactics, right?
Okay.
So the whole point goes all the way back to medieval times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where your whole point is to break up the enemy cohesion, and that forces them back.
Right.
Okay.
So-
And the thing is like we were saying, in D-Day invasion, that really failed, and that's why it's really a funny thing to me.
Or at least in that.
Why they use that everywhere.
Overall, it was a success, but.
Right. Eventually, it was a success,
Yeah.
but it was at the cost of a lot of people.
Right.
It's like
and
60,000 guys later.
It was kind of a miracle that things worked out on Omaha the way they did, and they managed to get those waves off of the beach instead of just ending up being a giant massacre. And they already
Right.
cost them a whole lot of people. It was really bad.
Well, and they acted like. I mean, we
The same-
act
the same
today
thing
like
hap- the
that
same
was
thing
the way it
happened.
was supposed to go.
Right,
Like that
yeah.
was the plan, Like
Yeah.
we were just supposed to be these communist soldiers running in with one magazine of ammo. When in reality,
You won.
they brought in.
We
like,
give you a rifle,
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
5 rounds, and then we give you behind him 5 rounds. When he dies, you pick up the ammo, you
like-
load the gun, and you continue from there.
as my dad used to say, "We will do it. You will like it. You will enjoy in your heart." Now,
Now, yes,
no, that's.
yeah.
This sort of notion that they were just sent in to just die is not really
Yeah,
accurate.
or at least that
they
or
dropped.
at least the idea that
Yeah.
they were that the plan was for them to charge straight into
Right.
gunfire and just charge the fortifications.
I do believe they had
it was-
30 odd tanks were supposed to make it to the beach, and
Oh,
only
yeah.
about 6 made it.
Oh
it's
yeah,
like-
that would have made a huge difference against those big bunkers that you always see.
Right. I mean, that was designed
instead,
to draw some of the fire for
They
everybody.
tried to float the tanks in.
Yeah.
They put how you have when you have like a cup, and you put it, into the water upside down, and you got an air bubble. That was
Yeah.
basically the principle. They had giant, like a tent that would fit over the tank, and they launched the tank out of the front, and it would float because the air would hold it up.
Yep.
It didn't work.
It worked
It was really
anywhere but
bad.
heavy seas, and even when it did work, it was kind of a very slow and unwieldy.
It's
It's like trying to drive a ship with 70 tons of tank. Well, not really.
It's like
maybe like 50
imagine-
tons of tank below you.
It's like a Mary Poppins tank.
That's right.
It has an umbrella that holds it up in the water.
Well, it actually had a skirt that goes around and would lift up, and this is what would happen is that skirt couldn't really handle the waves, and so it would get swamped. The tank would get swamped and then sink, and since it weighs 50 tons, it sinks pretty dang fast.
Yeah.
So there's not much you can do about it if it goes
Yeah.
south. But
A lot of tankers didn't make it.
yeah, but it's funny because we see this strategy used in lots of different movies. In particular, this use of assault. We see it in the Star Wars movies, right? In A New Hope, for example. That's the kind of strategy the Empire is using when the stormtroopers are breaking into the Tantive 4.
Yeah.
And-
Well,
and-
they're at least equipped to do it, theoretically.
They are, yeah. I mean, they've
they're
got
all
armor.
They're
they've
all
got,
wearing armor.
Right, but it's this shock strategy, and it works well against a rebel force that's not really well prepared.
Yeah.
But
Flashbang.
Yeah, essentially flashbang. I mean, they're not incompetent. They breach like Delta Force operators. I mean,
Yeah.
heavily armored Delta Force operators. But I mean,
Yeah.
if you only got one way to do it that way. Of course,
Pretty much.
you play Star Wars Battlefront, and really all they do is just throw thermal detonators at each other all day long. But
Right, yeah.
to each his own, right?
It's true. You really don't see a lot of grenades in those movies. Like the only time you even see the thing that has been interpreted in Star Wars as this is a grenade,
Yeah.
has a name, thermal detonator, and it only appears in the third movie when Leia threatens Jabba with it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny, that was an integral part of military shock strategy.
Oh yeah,
the
grenades
grenade,
and
hand grenade was. It made it viable.
They do have a giant explosion when the door kind of goes.
Yeah,
you know,
Well,
and,
it's funny because there's two
that
weapons.
does distract them enough.
There's two weapons that you would use for shock strategy, and one of them was the bayonet, believe it or not, and the other one was the grenade.
That actually makes sense. The bayonets.
Yeah, and they use that in a lot of cases, you know. But in some of the Star Wars movies, it's kind of funny because, especially the newer ones, is they tend to use this shock strategy on pretty much anybody. they use it everywhere because it's kind of cool and sexy looking. You know, you run everybody out there and run at people shooting. You know? Exactly. Problem is, it's also if your enemy is really in a well prepared position and is not disorganized, it's the best way to get everybody shot.
Yeah.
So.
Oh damn it!
I think it's a good looking strategy, but I think they use it too much.
Yeah, I noticed that in modern war films and stuff, they've tried to change this by essentially doing the same thing, only different. It's like in the older movies, they had a lot of people that would kind of it's like they would walk slowly, but they would do a lot of hiding behind things. And nowadays they're like, screw cover. And it's like, as long as I'm walking and aiming the gun at the same time, it looks tactical, right? And so they'll literally have when the hero is picking guys off, he won't pick them off from where they're sitting behind cover. He'll run into the frame, and the other guy will run into the frame from the other side of the room, and then the hero will just kind of hit them, you know, he'll shoot them, and then they will fall down.
Right.
Like sliding in.
Yeah.
And
try that in paintball. See how well that works for you.
Well, see, I think they get it from games like Call of Duty.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think you're right.
That's the way you get a lot of the kills, is that you don't really use cover a lot. You just run into the room full speed, firing like blazes, and then the other guy is doing the exact same thing, and it's like a quick draw mesh. It's like,
yeah, no, and it works pretty well, actually. This is one of those little false truths about playing video games where you get to respawn. I quickly learned when you do this, if you get any good at it, you can run around and do this, and you can kill more of them than they kill at you. But the problem is it's pretty much suicidal in most situations.
Yeah,
like you will die. You'll just get a couple people before you die.
Yeah,
you know?
It's like the only reason most people make an exception for this when they're actually having SWAT like breach the house is because, well, they already know where you are, and the walls are the walls of your average house, whatever they're breaching, don't really inhibit bullets very well.
When really they only dynamic breach.
In other words, your best
they don't know
option,
you're coming.
So in other words,
or you don't know they're coming.
In other words, even if they don't know you're coming, then no, you're not going to use cover because you're going to fill the room with as many guys as possible.
Right.
And if they do know you're coming, then you got to go even faster.
Or vice versa.
They know where you're coming, and there's no cover anywher. Like in your average domestic house, there's drywall, and if a bad guy panics, he's just going to shoot all through the walls. And so in other words, the only way to eliminate as many targets as possible, as fast as possible, is to just run in full speed and kill everything you see.
Well, you know, when you're fighting an enemy in a prepared position, you know, you got to change the game, because if you walk into a prepared position, that's the whole point of a prepared position. He gets to win because he has the advantage on you. That's the whole point of sitting in cover and waiting, forcing them to come to you.
Right.
And if you got like a hostage or something like that, now you've got time on your side. If they try to do that, you could kill the hostage or whatever. And that's why, you know, SWAT operators, you know, we see this Ghost Recon, not Ghost Recon. What do they call that game recently?
Which one?
Tom Clancy. Rainbow Six, the most recent Rainbow Six. You know, where they have breaching, and they've got
Siege.
Siege. That's what it's
Rainbow
called.
Six Siege.
Rainbow Six Siege, and they've got. You'll notice that they've got to come up with all sorts of different ways to get at the bad guys.
Yeah.
You know, so you got to learn how to breach through a wall that they didn't expect you to come through, or something like that. You've got to use surprise, because running into it, you know, just with filling the room with guys is
you're running into a kill box.
Just everybody's going to die. I mean, that's a good way to. That's exactly what they want you to do.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, that's you know, if you play a game where you got zombies or something like that, that's what you do. You want them to come to you.
Yeah.
And
I think that's one of the reasons why.
Either that, or you just armor up so much no one can touch you.
That's why you have zombies, which you wouldn't think would be conducive to an action game because they don't shoot or anything.
Yeah.
And that's why they are so popular in action games, is because they can't shoot. You shoot.
Yeah.
You are the player. You shoot. Nobody wants to play as
Right.
a zombie.
And it forces you to use unorthodox tactics, but I think people think that's like a normal tactic.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well, yeah, and it's really not. And if you use it too much, it really does look dumb. Like almost they use it a lot in TV now. I noticed, like in NCIS and stuff.
Yeah.
And they'll have they have the shakiness, but the shakiness is less now. But they'll have sort of this over-the-shoulder kind of third-person view, and they'll just have the hero stand in the middle of the room and shoot at everything that comes through, like the doors.
Yeah.
You know, the door, the window, the door. Again, somebody comes in behind him. He does it. He hits that guy too. It's just it's like aimbot. You know?
Yeah.
It's just like, and then he goes, whew. Yeah, you know, and he like shakes his hands or something.
Yeah.
He lets the gun hang against his chest because he's got a 3-point sling or whatever.
Right.
And just shakes his hands like, man, yeah, that was quite a workout, man.
Well, you
Just
know,
wasted
that's
like 6 guys. They all ran right into my bullets.
That's right. Well, I mean, that's why Delta Force operators and
Requires
SWAT.
no skill.
That's why they stay alive. Is because they fight unfair all the time.
Yeah.
They always make it really hard for you to shoot them, and they make it really easy for them to shoot you. You know.
Yeah.
It's like forcing somebody who's left-handed to peek out of a right angle corner. You know.
Yeah.
Like,
But that's the thing is that I feel like a lot of that comes from video games, not from real life. And so as a result, when people are making movies and they think, well, I play Call of Duty.
right.
I'll make a movie that's like one of those scenes in Call of Duty. I think it's helped make the action scenes more dynamic.
Yeah.
But it hasn't made them more
Meaningful.
realistic or meaningful.
Yeah, I
it's
think-
it's like the script, depending on the way you shoot it, the script doesn't really change. It's like
Right.
6 mooks walk into the room. Hero walks in other end of the room. Bang, 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 bang. 6 mooks are all dead. Close-ups, bleeding, death, bullets. Hero, quip.
There you go.
That's the script. You can shoot it both ways.
Have a
it
cold
doesn't
one,
change the
something.
plot.
I don't know. Need
It
a
doesn't
one-liner.
change that section of the script at all.
Right, and I, that plays into lots of different aspects of things because I think what we're kind of seeing in that is they love the cool looking aspects of combat, okay, and movies love that aspect, but it's not really reality, you know.
Yeah.
It's really funny because it's like we're in this like era where supposedly World War I, put us off of the glory of war, and now we're just glorifying war, but we just don't talk about the actual logistics of it. That's essentially the only part that's not glorious, we decided.
I guess. I don't know. I feel like it's almost like, it's like war is no longer glorious, but if you make an action movie and you're not allowed to feel sad because, hey, it's just a movie.
Right.
Then, so like you can have a war movie where like what's it, Heartbreak Ridge, not Heartbreak Ridge, sorry. Heartbreak Ridge is also a good movie, but
Hacksaw Ridge.
Hacksaw Ridge,
Yeah.
which came out recently, and there were so many people that walked into it and reviewed it and were like, I was so astonished at how gory it was. I've seen lots of horror movies, but I was so shocked. I felt sick, and I remember seeing it, and I went, oh, come on. I mean, it was gory and bloody, but a lot of it felt kind of. I mean, it was stylized.
Was
and
it just me, or was
felt
it felt like a cross between like a Clint Eastwood movie and a Quentin Tarantino movie?
It was almost John Woo-ish. It was very.
Yeah, it
you
was,
know, it was. They had a similar thing. It's like this was kind of before the war movies really kind of settled into their hyper realistic. Style following. It was like Saving Private Ryan came out and everybody copied the look of it, but not the styling, the authenticity of that. And then they made Band of Brothers, and now everybody just copies Band of Brothers and tries to make everything as super realistic as possible. But in between that, there was a couple of movies, and one of them was called, I know it, Wind Talkers.
Yeah.
And it was an R movie. It was about the Battle of Okinawa, and it was starring Nicolas Cage and this other guy, and it was about real people
and his drum magazine Thompson submachine gun.
Right. And it was you know why? Because it was a John Woo movie.
Yeah.
It was literally directed by John Woo. And if you know anything about John Woo, you know that this is the king of the stylized action scene. Every gunfight in a John Woo movie is like a scene from 300.
Give man 2 guns and he's a god.
Yeah, that was like
He thinks he's a god. That's right.
and they didn't really change anything. It's like there's just multiple firefights where Nicolas Cage is running across the screen, spraying his Thompson from the hip at a full on sprint, and just wasting whole squads of Japanese kamikaze guys, and it's almost hilarious in retrospect. It's not really that bad a movie. It was fun.
Yeah,
but you watch it and you're expecting Band of Brothers, and that's not what you're getting if you go into Wind Talkers. You're getting a John Woo movie.
Right.
And anyway.
Well, and you know, I think that this is one of the difficulties movies have had is I think they've become more and more unrealistic when it comes to warfare, which is weird to think about.
Well, I think we
even
kind
the
of hit
TV
peak
shows
realistic
have gotten
with,
worse in a
with
lot of
Band
ways.
of Brothers, and now it's kind of that things are getting more gaudy as things go on. It's like they try to keep the intensity, but it's become more video gamey as it goes on.
Yeah.
And so it.
Well, what kind of things does that affect? I mean, we end up seeing a lot of things.
I think it makes them think that they know what it's like, even though it's really not.
And to be fair, you know, I mean, I've never been in warfare. I've never been out there myself.
No,
but I've seen a lot of.
Neither.
I've read a ton of history about these guys, and it's funny
and we know people who've gone to war.
Right, right.
We have several acquaintances who are soldiers and who've been in the armed forces, and
right.
You know, kind of just by osmosis, we don't always just go, hey, so what did you think of this war movie? Like when that guy's head exploded, did you? No, we don't ask them questions like that. But there are movies that they like, and sometimes it's like, oh, what, you like that? And they were like, yeah, I really like that one. It had this aspect right, and then we go, oh, okay. So we've kind of absorbed a little bit of that by osmosis. So when something strikes us as odd, and it's not like just an obvious stylized choice, it's like it feels like they just didn't know. It bugs me.
Well, and also it kind of bothers me when it's only a stylized choice. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. When there's like no purpose for the reason why you're using stuff. It's like they don't understand that the military is a job. You know, it's like when you ask these guys, you know, what do they do? And they're like, well, it's a job. You know, like I'm a specialist. I do this. You know? And in reality, everybody has to think like that. You know, the whole mantra that, you know, every Marine is a rifleman, you know, it works because every Marine is expected to have the quality of a rifleman at some point. Yeah. Everybody's capable of fighting, but everybody's like a cook, you know. Everybody's like a specialist, you know, like we have a family member who used to handle, and most people don't know this stuff even existed, but they handled the radio tracking of incoming artillery shells so that they could counter fire other people's batteries. So in other words, what happens is the enemy shoots their artillery at you, and you can radar track those or radio track those trajectories. And based on that, you can plot back to where the bad guy actually is
and take out his guns.
Shoot his artillery out.
Yeah.
And that was really effective during the Korean War. And that's why the enemy had a really hard time using their artillery on us. You know, if you look at the parallel the North Koreans fought us back to, the reason why they didn't push us any further was because we had all our artillery set up in this like doomsday line of death.
It's like siege tanks in StarCraft.
Yeah, it was essentially siege tanks in StarCraft, and apparently it works well versus the Zerg, which happens to be the North Koreans.
Yeah, which explains why StarCraft is so popular. In South Korea.
That does explain a lot. Yep. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah. Okay, so we haven't really cleanly transitioned from World War II to Star Wars to Ancient and back again. It's kind of been just kind of meandering from one subject to the other. Why don't we go on to let's do some of the Ancient stuff just to mix it up a little bit.
Okay.
And I see one really common thing, especially when you have any kind of fight where you have a bunch of people with hand weapons on one side and a bunch of people on the other side. Melee fight. You know, nobody's shooting anything unless it's like bows.
Right.
They will do all kinds of extra dramatic things that I just think really they look really silly if you're not like, oh wow, that's if you're not already enamored with the way that looks, it looks really dumb. And number one, I have two things that I'm thinking of. Number one is when you have two groups of infantry, or well, cavalry, it kind of makes sense, but with infantry and they charge straight into each other and get totally mixed up, and that's the way like 90% of these fights go. And it seems so silly to me because usually, it's not that you didn't have that happen, but usually they tried to prevent it. It would the units with the most cohesion, or the usually won the fight.
Right. The people with the best organization, and the people who are, truthfully, the people who are least afraid of dying, are the people who are going to win. And going all the way back to the Greek hoplite, for example, this is where the first. I think that's the first time that we know a whole lot about how they used their formation to keep themselves together. And the biggest thing about the hoplite formation was that you protected the guy next to you.
Right.
Yeah, the phalanx. And this is not the phalanx you guys think of with the big, crazy long Macedonian spears. These are 9 foot long, what's called the dory. And it's a 9 foot long spear. And what the hoplites would do is they would kind of lock shields. Not really lock shields the way we mean it exactly, but just overlap a little bit. But it was interesting because that shield protected your friend.
Right.
And it's funny, if we have some notion of single man fighting, and I think this is what kind of causes that to happen, is because we haven't had people, in formations trying to actually kill each other for like 2,000 years. I mean, no, not 2,000.
No, not 2,000. 500.
500 years.
500
yeah,
years.
that's a good one. Very, very, very long time. And
pretty much since guns became able to fire one shot without just farting.
Right, basically the 1640s, I think, is about when you start to see that start to drop off. I guess the last couple close hand-to-hand fighting was probably the end of World War II, maybe the end of the Korean War.
Yeah.
You had a couple bayonet charges. But those aren't really formation fighting anymore.
Yeah, and the other thing is just that when you were doing that kind of thing, when you're fighting nowadays and you have a charge, you kind of have to stay intentionally separated from each other. Because if you get bunched up, you get blown up.
Right.
Or you get mowed down, and they get a free, 2 or 3 guys for one hit. And so that was pretty much beginning with World War I. Everybody tried to be I think it was even earlier that just basically it wasn't even machine guns that changed it. It was just repeaters.
It was just accuracy.
If you could fire it was accuracy, being able to hit something beyond like your nose, and being able to fire a gun more than once every minute.
I think
that was all that changed that. After that, everybody tried to be as spread out as possible and as close to the ground and as close to cover as possible.
Right.
And that's the way it's been. And
it was mostly
we're totally
with the
confused when we have people trying to do these big old-fashioned slugfests, and we think that what they would do is they would just, they get all mixed up eventually, so wouldn't they just charge into each other? That's really dramatic. You see that in the first one that comes to my mind for some reason is the Black Panther movie at the end, where all the guards run into all the army dudes,
that's right.
And the Rhino is kind of just crisscrosses the battlefield for like 5 minutes without even stopping. And they have a dozen individual duels, and I think the thing, and meanwhile you have a movie like Gladiator. And Gladiator, it's like it's easier to mention exceptions than the than
examples of this, because
because it's if it's a movie with fighting with people with swords, it's all of them.
I will give a modern
Gladiator,
movie credit
the modern,
of trying to do this right.
Well, I'm trying to get to the Gladiator though. The Gladiator though is one of the best examples of the exact opposite of that, and it's a heck of a lot more realistic. And I mean that even when he's trying to display chaos on the part of the barbarians. So you have the Romans.
Hercules tried to do that. The most recent Hercules movies tried to do that right.
Well, sometimes they use formations, but it's like arbitrary. Like,
you're absolutely right.
But in Gladiator, they make a very strong point, especially in just the opening battle scene. It's one of the best, and of course, this is one of the best battle scenes there
absolutely.
is. Like, in the entire history of movies, the opening Gladiator battle scene is one of the best ever done.
Well, and somebody totally went and looked at how the Romans used to fight people. I mean,
that was
whole
what made
first
the
battle
difference.
scene.
And think about how opposite this is from everything you've ever seen on TV ever.
I mean, there is a melee, but it's after the cavalry charge into the enemy.
It takes like 15 minutes to build up to that, because the opening, so you have the opening, and they throw a bunch of, they have their catapults, and they throw a bunch of stuff at the barbarians, and they're showing how different the two sides are. The barbarians are like moving back and forth almost like a sea, but they're still sticking together in one bunch.
Right.
And then you have the Roman units, and they have these rigid blocks, and when they move forward, they move slowly. Remember, the Romans are attacking, but they're not charging.
Right.
They are walking. They walk, they have the shields, and basically the whole point is that every inch that they gain, those guys the barbarians can't get back.
Right.
Whenever the barbarians realize what's going on, they gather all the archers together, they throw some arrows at the Romans, and the Romans turtle up with the shields.
The testudo, or a short testudo.
Really. They turtle up, and the arrows land, and then they break it up and keep walking forward. It's no effect whatsoever.
Right.
And the discipline, just they're like Terminators, and they just walk right into it.
Right.
And in fact, by the time they get there, they're like the point where they actually engage. The barbarians have almost like their thinking has gone like, oh man, what do we do now? What do we do? Oh, I know, we're just gonna attack them. Okay, so we all go,
And everybody yells at each other. They
gather enough collective
like,
momentum to charge into them. And remember, the Romans are the attackers.
Right.
And they've been conserving energy this whole time because they've been moving slowly. The barbarians have been wavering back and forth for like 5 minutes here, just screaming and yelling and working themselves up and trying to get, and then finally they decide to attack because they're the ones being attacked, and so they decide to counterattack into the Romans, and it's too late. The Romans have gathered or are close enough that they have more strength, and they can just stop the barbarians right there on the barbarian side of the field. Basically, if you're playing football, this would be like if the opposing team,
it's like playing
did
rugby
not have
versus football.
It's like it's like if in football the opposing team doesn't have a captain and the organized team just walks forward, and the only people who are blocking are like blocking kind of like two guys block over on the right, and then they give up because there's too many Romans, and then they block two guys on the left, and it's not, but dang, what do we got? And then they thought, no, we're too broken up. Okay, we got to all collect up together, and no, we're gonna all hit them at once. And though they're taking on the Romans on equal terms, and then what happens?
The cavalry hit them in the back.
The cavalry flanks them, and that's when it all goes nuts, and you have that big fight. But by the time everything goes nuts, and the generals can't control anything.
Right.
The Romans have the upper hand. The Romans have won. It's just a matter of time. You just have a big fight, and that's the end. And that's the end of the battle.
Well, and the difference there is, that one they have the element of surprise that cavalry does. Right?
Yeah.
And two, they have higher unit cohesion. The U.S. Army talks about this.
Yeah.
The U.S. military talks about this. How unit cohesion is what allows a unit to do things that it wouldn't normally be able to do. So the Romans, with their discipline, are able to stay together, and they stay together for two reasons. One, because the officers making sure they stay together, but two, because they know that having a man next to him is one less blind spot.
Yeah.
There's one less place a guy can blindside you from. And if you ever look at Caesar and Gaul, you look at the way they describe the barbarians attacking the Roman formations. Essentially, what you see is these Roman formations, which are holding closely together, and they would just be attacked by the barbarians, and the barbarians couldn't break them up. And that was why they would lose. It wasn't because there were more casualties on both sides. The barbarians would get almost tired of trying to break up the Roman formation. Because the Romans wouldn't fight them mano on mano. That's what they wanted.
Well, right, exactly.
That's what they wanted the whole time.
It doesn't become a dozen or 400 little duels happening across the entire battlefield.
It's like once that melee is broken up, you better be winning. Otherwise, unit cohesion drops dramatically because there are so many places. I mean, you notice those crazy fights. I mean, go look at I think they have that Game of Thrones battle where they have everybody just charge into each other, and then it turns to this crazy melee. Obviously, people are dying left and right, but if you look at the actual casualty figures from a lot of these ancient battles, they're really low. I mean, you look at them and there's 100 guys died.
Out of like how many?
It's like 40,000 guys. Yeah. And really only 100 guys died, and we had a couple thousand casualties. It's like wounded guys.
Yeah.
And the reason is why does a wounded guy get away?
Well, I mean,
He gets away because he's got friends.
oh, okay.
You see, they stay close.
So in other words, they stay right next to each other, basically, and you do a lot of...
They protect each
in
other.
a lot of these fights, you really don't end up moving that far, or if you do,
Oh, yeah.
you're either really winning or really losing.
Yeah, and that's why, if you look at a battle like, I think it's...
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what it's called, but it was where the Macedonians ended up fighting the Romans. And a big motion in that battle was because somebody had his head on a swivel and looked back and realized the Macedonians had left their flank exposed. A lot of battle is this sort of way.
Yeah,
if you ever sit down and
for
try
the previous
and play,
half hour or hour,
Right,
they'd
right.
spent just slugging it out on those same lines.
Right,
And
right.
nothing had changed.
well, and not only that, but everybody here doesn't want to die.
Yeah.
Like this is like my top of my list. I don't want to die.
Yeah.
Second thing is I want to win the battle.
Yeah.
And everybody thinks that way. And
So they do a lot of feinting, just kind of jabbing but not hitting anything,
Right.
and then ducking back.
Well, that's why a lot of times the safest formations were the ones that won. That's why you see that. The Romans have these big shields, and so they feel safe. And so they're able to kind of hold together, and even though they're not the biggest or the strongest, the Italians had no reputation for being physically superior to anybody. But they would win.
Especially people like the Germans or the Gauls.
The Germans were great specimens of manhood, but the Romans would stay together, and the Romans would win.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's something, and that's why this whole sort of crazy melee is fun to shoot, I'm sure, and it makes it much easier because
But because you don't
it's
have
hard
to
to
keep
put a
track of
camera.
where all the units are,
and it's hard to
or
keep
where,
a camera when you're shot like 400 people in the frame,
Yeah.
But it makes it tough. Makes it tough to really express that well, and I think movies like Gladiator have done an excellent job of it. And I think they do the best job of it because they don't play it up.
Yeah.
They just treat it like it's normal.
Well, yeah, it's just part of the ebb and flow of the scene, and that's it's like even if they'd had that same battle plan laid out, but they hadn't shot it properly,
Yeah.
they'd have been screwed.
Right.
They wouldn't have. It would have just been average, and that's really the key to it. Is if you understand what's important about a battle scene and why it flips sides and why this goes the way it goes, then that really gives you a huge advantage over somebody who has no idea why something would happen in a battle.
Well, and it helps you with your suspension of disbelief, right? Because if you're watching something happen and you're trying to make sense of it, if it doesn't make sense, if it doesn't pass your sniff test,
Yeah.
you're gonna be kind of irked at it the whole time, trying to make sense of why this really doesn't make sense.
But yeah, you're just not going to be engaged. Your brain is not going to be engaged on the same level as one that is well thought out and well expressed.
And this is
even if you know
yeah.
nothing about military history, that's not what you're trying to convey. You're
Right.
you're not
Absolutely.
trying to go and to understand
You're going
this,
exactly where I was
you're
going.
going to need a history book. No,
Yeah.
that is not the point. That's you're supposed to see in the way that the characters behave, in the way that the characters act, in their body language, in their vocals,
Right.
in the way that you shoot them, in the who that you shoot. Who are you doing the close-ups of? That's the focal point of the battle. Who are you?
And who's important?
Like even if you're
how do you tell that,
even if you're picking out okay, well this battle scene is about how about the little guy. Okay,
Right.
but where you pick that little guy from makes a huge difference in how comprehensible the battle is. If you
Right.
pick one of the guys who's at the back and looking at everything, well, it's going to be kind of boring.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right up until they lose, if there's a loss or something.
Right.
If you pick somebody that's at the front, at the very front, well, it might be good and it will be a lot more exciting,
Go
but it
watch the
also
battle in
might be,
Braveheart.
but it also might be more confusing.
Right.
If you pick two guys, okay, so it's a big battle. I'm going to show the battle from like three angles. You pick one guy at the back, one guy at the front, one guy that's kind of in the middle, and he's with the archers or whatever.
Right.
See, now you've got a scene going because it's a story. It's almost like the units themselves are characters.
Right.
See, and when you have
No, that's it.
the
The
skirmishers,
story.
the skirmishers
Yeah.
are one character.
Right.
And they have a kind of collective personality.
Right.
The way that they behave, a way that they talk. They have this really down in, for instance, like RTS games.
Oh, yeah.
Like you'll notice like a character in like StarCraft, you say the Marine.
Right.
The Marine talks and behaves in a way that reflects what he does on the battlefield. He's sitting there and goes, and the first thing you click on him, and the first thing he says is, "You want a piece of me, boy?"
Yeah.
And you know exactly what this guy does. It's like,
He has no clue of anything else, but he will shoot anything you tell him to shoot at.
It's like I wrote a sketch. Maybe
Yeah.
this will come out, maybe it won't. But I had like, how would you introduce these characters? And it was like about StarCraft, and you had this, and you had the sergeant come out, and he's like, "Turn Marines," and they're like, "Sir, yes, sir." And he goes, describe what is your job? And then they all go in a chorus, "Shoot it till it dies." This is their job. They are reckless. They are delicate. They run into things and just they run in and into any given situation and empty the magazine and scream and yell, and some of it's fear and some of it's courage, and that's what they do.
Right.
Then you have like let's pick another
Siege tank.
Siege tank.
Or Ghost, I don't know.
Siege tank.
Ghost is a good character.
Ghost is a good counter. Okay, the Ghost is basically sniper. He's a cold sniper. He
Yep.
talks like this. He stays at the back. He's like, "Anybody need an exterminator?"
Yep.
You know, and whenever you click on him, he's like, "I'm waiting on," or I don't know.
Well, and this is the
whole.
whole
He's a lot
aspect
more
of this.
laid back. You don't put
Right,
this guy in the front. If you do, he yells at you and he says, "It's getting pretty hot out here."
Yeah.
You know, because he's delicate. He's like, "Somebody else is here. Somebody else supposed to be a cannon fodder out here holding the line. I'm supposed to be hiding. Stop this.
But
I'm
you know,
gonna be splattered."
all of this plays into. I think this is part of the misunderstanding that a lot of Hollywood types have. I think, and you see this in so many movies, where they think that the the battle is incidental to the story. The
Yeah.
battle is the story. You know, for whatever period you've got there,
Mm-hmm.
it is its own story, and it has emotional aspects. It's not just a strategic thing, and it's a story with people in it. You know,
Yeah,
and those people and the choices they make are important. You know, and that's
Yeah,
why
it's-
if
it's
people
like a
just
battle-
do stuff
a
without
battle
real
is
choices,
not
it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, a battle is not just a sequence that happens. It's not just a scene. It's a
Right.
climax. It's the culmination of several other things that have been going on, and they all led to this.
It's a chess
And
game
then-
with sword and blood and dying people.
Well,
I
right,
mean,
and you have the reason that they're so short is because they're kind of, it's like trying to define where the battle scene begins and where it ends is kind of difficult if you do it right.
Right.
You know, I mean, obviously, if there's an obvious time difference, like the battle starts at dawn and they don't do any fighting
No, that-
between now and then.
that battle in Braveheart, I think, is a really good example of this, where they have this. I'm trying to remember what the battle was. I think it's Falkirk. I could be wrong.
Is this the one where he goes, "We have reserves"?
Yeah. They have reserves, and everybody starts dying, and William Wallace rides out. You know, that one was a little bit difficult to tell when the battle really ended. You know, it was kind of ethereal. You know, because William Wallace kind of leaves the battlefield. You know.
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose that's still part of the battle scene.
Right. No, but I guess
the
I'm just
point
saying,
is
you know,
that the
just like
story
people
is continuing
withdrawing.
through it, and that
Right.
matters. Like
Right,
one of the
right.
first things that you notice is that the things that happen in the previous scenes, like his talking to the Irish,
Right.
make a difference in that later scene because you need to know why the Irish troops that charge at them, they charge at each other. The Scots and the Irish
Yeah,
charge
yeah.
at each other, and then suddenly they slow down and just kind of shake hands and go, "Ha, let's go punch the English."
Go
you
kill
know?
the English together.
It's like, it's funny because the English are like, "What's going on? Those Irish are with us, and they're supposed to be doing their duty as our auxiliaries. What the heck
Yeah.
is wrong?" And the reason is, well, we don't like being. The Irish are being oppressed just like the Scots are, and they don't like that, and they're both
And they're
crazy.
people.
So
You know,
gonna-
they're,
yeah.
they're human characters. You know, and I think
yeah. And
you
so
know, like I said earlier, you know, combat is a job. It is a
Right.
job, but there is an emotional element
it's
to
a
it.
skill.
and-
It's
Yeah.
a skill, and it's an emotional thing.
Right, but
So,
it makes sense.
in
It's
the-
not
in the-
crazy, you know.
right.
It's not just like I fight people because I fight people, and I think that's you know sort of the sense you get in, for example, the more recent Star Wars movies. You know, it's like
now
you
we're
know
back to Star
Supreme
Wars.
Emperor Snoke or Supreme Leader Snoke, right?
Yeah.
It's like why does he fight people?
Well, because which guy?
Why
The
did
stormtroopers or
See,
Snoke?
Emperor Palpatine had a very good reason to come to power. He wants to wipe out the Jedi.
I think that's a bigger plot problem
he has,
because
purpose,
we have no idea who Snoke is, and now we will never know.
And then we immediately killed him because we couldn't figure it out. Probably that's what I'm sitting here going.
Right, but that's true. The First Order has this giant gaping hole where its motivation should be, and it's like, it's because like we're evil and shit.
It's so big. In fact, that hole is so big. In fact. That Kylo Ren,
we're like Nazis, get it?
Yeah, we're like Nazis. Kylo Ren, who is the second in command of a whole dang place and becomes in charge pretty dang quickly. Sorry, spoilers. But well, we did already tell him Snoke was dead. But anyway,
I'm sorry. I'm spoiling without even knowing.
But Kylo Ren doesn't even know, and nor does he care. He immediately is like, I don't care about Snoke. I'm going to do my own thing.
I guess.
And he doesn't even know what that is.
Well, the biggest one to me was the whole Praetorian Guards. They have that big fight scene with
like,
the Red
Why
Guards, and I'm sitting there going, okay, I get it. You wanted to have a big climax to finish off this sequence, but the
Praetorian Guard is famous for changing sides, not for fighting people.
Yeah, it's like the guards that they're named after. The real life Praetorian Guards were the Roman Emperor's bodyguard, and the interesting thing about them is that basically they ended up putting a lot of emperors into power and taking them out.
Yep.
So the whole idea that you had a bunch of guys named Praetorians who, once the emperor is dead, decide to kill whoever killed the emperor, kind of is like, they didn't even stop for like 2 seconds and go, well, this guy seems cooler than the last guy,
and he's already dead. So
and it's like, and
what's
it's
the
not
point?
like we can prevent Snoke from getting killed because he's already dead.
Yeah,
so,
we kind of failed already.
Well, Emperor's already dead.
Yeah.
So
I was like, who's going to take over after that? Hux?
I don't. Yeah.
Like,
I don't know. Well,
holy
it's
crap.
funny. Hux seems to have that. Well, no, he doesn't. Well, yeah, he seems to have that thought for like 2 seconds, and then.
But we all know
out.
he's completely incapable of it. If Hux got in power, he would be that would be the best thing the Resistance could ever hope for. like Hux is the worst possible leader of anything.
This is why the Star Wars stuff will need its own episode, because it's just there's so many things.
Hux couldn't lead a lemonade stand to success.
Well, he works for the government. I mean,
yeah.
But even that, okay. Star Wars is going to need its own episode because it's amazing the range of good and bad in terms of Star Wars battles. They're really kind of a almost like a time capsule of how battle scenes have changed over the last 40 years or so.
When I think a guy I was listening to recently made a really good description of that, and he said that what made particularly the original Star Wars ones kind of a time capsule of things is because they're about a lot of they have a lot of timeless characteristics, and they have aspects of talking about what was he talking about? He said he was talking about how they have that last one you showed me.
Was that the Emperor Penguin guy? Oh yeah. By the way, he's on YouTube.
So.
If you see, we're gonna remember what his name is, and we'll definitely bring him up in the Star Wars episode. But basically, there's a guy on YouTube. He made a video that was
essentially the one we wanted to make.
It was about the bombers and the Last Jedi, and he said in parentheses it was like, or why is everyone so incompetent? And he's definitely a history buff nerd, kind of like us. But the
main thing I was thinking is that Star Wars deals with a lot of big aspects. Aspects of stories about love, stories about war and right and wrong and light and dark. And I think that's part of what causes Star Wars to be this sort of timeless characteristic, and Tolkien has a lot of that too.
Well, yeah, Tolkien and Star Wars are almost like the two kind of styles. It's like everything is almost like everything in science fiction or fantasy is almost like Star Wars or like Tolkien.
I mean, they're the same story. One's fantasy, one's sci-fi.
Yeah, it's like you could describe everything as it's Star Wars, but, or it's Tolkien, but, and then this thing.
Right.
And that's not universally. I mean, if you get into the harder science fiction, it's a little bit more general. But but a lot of it, especially the really, really popular stuff is like that. Anyway, so we will see you next time. I've been John Fulton.
I'm always Matthew Bolton.
And we'll see you later.